I think we'll begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to meeting number 54 of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Today, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, we will be continuing our study of sexual harassment in the federal workplace. Today, our first witness is from the Canadian Labour Congress, Ms. Vicky Smallman, National Director, Women's and Human Rights Department. So welcome, and thank you for having accepted our invitation. We also have with us today from the Professional Association of Foreign Service Officers, Mr. Timothy Edwards, President. Good morning. This morning, you will have 10 minutes each for your opening remarks. And I'll let you know when there's about a minute left to your time. And then there will be a round of questions and answers. I'll also let you know when there's a minute left. Sometimes it throws witnesses off when I cut them off, so I like to let them know beforehand. Perhaps we'll begin with Ms. Vicky Smallman this morning, rather. You have 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Members of the Canadian Labour Congress, I'd like to thank you for affording me the opportunity to present our views. The CLC brings together Canada's national and international unions, along with the provincial and territorial federations of labour and 130 district labour councils, whose members work in virtually all sectors of Canadian economy, in all occupations, in all parts of Canada. In preparing for these remarks, I was brought back to the beginnings of my career as an activist when I was a student representative on a university committee developing its first ever sexual harassment policy. This was in 1987 or so, and the issue of sexual harassment on campuses and in workplaces was gaining prominence. Everybody knew it was a problem, but we struggled to break through the silence that surrounds the issue of harassment. And despite the fact that our rights have been clarified in the courts, that policies at all levels of government have been developed, that collective agreement language in workplaces across the country have been negotiated, it seems this silence still acts as an effective barrier to true equality and justice, especially in workplaces where the culture still reflects a power imbalance between women and men. This is not to say that we have not made significant progress. Unions have worked hard to build support within our own membership for strong collective agreement language on workplace harassment, including sexual harassment. Unions have developed training for representatives and educational programs on human rights, on women's equality, on health and safety, on collective bargaining, which all reinforce the need to prevent harassment and address it quickly when it does occur. One of the best tools in preventing harassment of any kind is a healthy, inclusive workplace with a commitment to gender equality. Job security, reasonable workloads, and good labor relations all offer a sense of stability and comfort in the workplace, and while it does not completely prevent individuals from harassing others, it might create a climate that allows women to feel safe about coming forward with a complaint. Workplace culture is important. As you conduct this study, I hope you will consider looking at the culture of federal workplaces and any factors which may create an environment conducive to harassment or which may impede its prevention. And by impeding its prevention, I think that would be that encourage women to keep silent. Clear policies, including collective agreement language, are also vital, as is training and support for both employees and managers. Strong union representation is also key, as union representatives can help act as a buffer for women and help them navigate the processes. In a healthy workplace, harassment is dealt with quickly before a grievance is even necessary, and if one is necessary, then timelines and processes become important. A lot comes down to leadership. There needs to be swift response to complaints and a willingness to take action when necessary. When leaders make a clear effort to prevent harassment and deal with it when it does occur, then women may be more likely to come forward if they feel they have been harassed. This means employers need to be sensitive to discrimination in all forms. Leaders need to see harassment and discrimination as organizational issues, not as isolated cases that have to do with conflicts between individuals. Conversely, if a leader is perceived to want to avoid conflict or is dismissive when problems of any kind arise, then women are likely to remain silent. Women may be silent for other reasons. When one sees some of the more prominent cases where women have waited years for justice or have been pushed out of workplaces, labeled as troublemakers, are refused promotion or ostracized on the job, it becomes difficult to see the benefits of saying something. Sandy Welsh, professor at the University of Toronto, did a study of the Canadian Rights Commission complaints between 1978 and 1995, and I don't know if you've already heard about this study, but she found that a majority of women who filed complaints lost jobs, became ill, or were demoted. Only 28% of women who filed complaints were still working for their employer. There is a cost to coming forward. But there's a cost to remaining silent as well, and the costs hit both employers and workers. We know that harassment can lead to absenteeism and a lack of focus at work. It compounds other workplace stresses. It has an impact on performance and productivity. Women may withdraw from coworkers. They may become depressed or anxious, abuse drugs or alcohol, end up on stress leave or sick leave. We know that some cases of harassment may escalate and become violent and even fatal. It's by breaking the silence that women have made the gains we have. Within the union movement, we recognize that harassment is a serious problem that undermines basic union principles of solidarity and human rights. We also recognize that sexual harassment as one aspect of violence against women is a symptom of a much greater problem, the inequality between women and men in our society. In 1993, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which states that violence against women is, quote, a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between women and men, which have led to the domination over and discrimination against women by men and to the prevention of the full advancement of women. So while this study examines the issue of sexual harassment in federal workplaces specifically, I think it's important to make the link between this issue and the broader need for the federal government to take action to end gender-based violence, especially today, which is the day we remember the lives of 14 young women brutally murdered at École Polytechnique in Montreal. We remember and we commit to taking action. So this morning, the Canadian Labour Congress joins women's groups, service providers, and others in calling for action in 3 ways. A national action plan to end violence against women, a national inquiry on the deaths and disappearances of Indigenous women in Canada, and leadership at the upcoming meetings of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which this year focuses on the issue of violence. So I'd like to close with a couple of words on the first of these actions, a national action plan. I think we can all agree that violence against women is a powerful barrier to women's equality and a violation of women's human rights. It is a complex, systemic problem that requires a comprehensive approach to developing solutions. The UN has called on all countries to have national action plans on violence against women by 2015. The National Action Plan is a blueprint for change which needs to include action at every level of government, in workplaces, schools, and local and cultural committees or communities, and even in individual relationships and behaviors. Canada's federal government should initiate a process to develop a plan involving territorial, provincial, and Aboriginal governments, as well as civil society, service providers, and survivors of gender-based violence. Canada's National Action Plan needs to include legislation, as well as specific resources and strategies for those most vulnerable to violence. Those are Aboriginal women, immigrant women, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered women, women with disabilities, and young women. Canada's plan must also provide sufficient resources for the strategies to be implemented, including support for research to measure progress. And it's this issue of research which pertains to, I think, what you're talking about at this study, because the last source of decent data that we have on sexual harassment in the workplace is the 1993 Violence Against Women survey. So we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of this survey. And so perhaps it would be a good time to recommend that we launch a new survey. And this survey can be part of the process of developing a national action plan, a real national action plan on violence against women. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to Mr. Edwards. You have 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Tim Edwards, and I am the president of the Professional Association of Foreign Service Officers.
The bargaining agent for Canada's non-executive diplomats, representing nearly 1,400 employees working mainly in foreign affairs and international trade, Citizenship and Immigration Canada, and the Canada Border Services Agency. Our members are 53% men and 47% women. I will note at the outset that PAFSO does not have specific recommendations to suggest to the Treasury Board's policy on harassment prevention and resolution of October 2012, or on harassment complaint and reporting mechanisms within the public service. I do, however, have several points to make concerning sexual harassment in the federal workplace and related topics falling within this committee's mandate. In the fall of 2012, PAFSO conducted a comprehensive survey to assess our members' demographic makeup, conditions of work, and the personal impacts of life in the Foreign Service. Over half our members completed the survey, providing a very reliable statistical baseline. Almost one-third, or 32%, of all respondents indicated that they had been the target of verbal, physical, or sexual harassment or other abusive behavior in the workplace. One-third. Either at headquarters in Ottawa or while posted abroad. The percentage who said they had witnessed such behavior stood at 45%. While the survey structure does not allow for a breakdown by gender, established statistical trends in the public service workplace suggest it is fair to assume that women responded in the affirmative at a significantly higher rate than men. Despite statutory whistleblower protections, it is often difficult for women to report such incidents given concerns over the potential impact to one's career advancement or one's ability to secure a desirable assignment in the future. Unlike other public servants, members of the Foreign Service do not own their positions. Rather, we are appointed to a level in the FS group and then assigned into positions temporarily according to departmental needs, and we must compete for a new assignment every 2 to 4 years. Since these are assignments and not appointments in the traditional sense of the word, they are not subject to the usual transparency and fairness requirements of conventional staffing. As a result, one's nebulous so-called corridor reputation becomes a hugely important criterion for selection for each assignment. You can see how there would be significant structural disincentives to coming forward if you had been harassed. And even if one decides to seek recourse, this can be challenging for Foreign Service officers posted abroad, as they are isolated from both their traditional support network of family and friends, as well as those managing the complaint, with potentially fewer witnesses to corroborate their story. Such discomfort is heightened at small or mid-sized missions where a smaller staff complement, as low as 2 or 3 and all the way up to, say, 15 or so, operates under very close working conditions and where one is not easily moved from one to another work unit or work location, to say nothing of when one's supervisor is the assailant. Beyond harassment, service abroad carries additional unique challenges. The demands of the job often put female Foreign Service officers in harm's way. Among respondents who had served overseas, almost 50% had experienced a terrorist attack in the city or region where they were based. 48% had experienced a natural disaster. 64% had been exposed to civil disobedience, 41% to armed conflict, and 35% to an epidemic or a pandemic. Assessing the impact of recent federal budget cuts, 36% of respondents reported a decrease in their family's quality of life abroad, and 52% reported an increase of family stress levels at post. Given the continuing preponderance of women as the lead caregiver in family relationships, including within Canada's diplomatic corps, it is safe to say that these impacts are disproportionately felt and absorbed by female officers. Indeed, anecdotal comments which accompanied our survey responses specifically flagged the quality and cost overseas of housing, educational facilities, childcare, and medical treatment. Women often face different challenges from their male counterparts while on posting. This is especially true in societies where religious or cultural values are not compatible with Canadian norms of gender equality, such as in strict Buddhist or Islamic countries. One female officer put it this way, and I quote, "Being a female diplomat in the Middle East often exposes me to situations where I am the only woman in a given environment. It can be difficult being the object of constant scrutiny, curiosity, and sometimes overt harassment, especially as there is no escape from it. I have required a male companion in many situations that were too uncomfortable or potentially dangerous without one. In practical terms, my workplace is fundamentally different than it would be for any other federal public servant, and I have accepted those risks and inconveniences. However, over the course of years, the reality of the scrutiny and the constant specter of harassment can contribute to professional and personal burnout. Another female officer had this to say. In Sri Lanka, Buddhist monks are active in politics and national life. During the peace process, this required interaction with religious leaders in promoting Canada's values and priorities. But their strict rules of no contact whatsoever with women, they will not even shake hands or accept a business card if there is a risk of touching, meant that I was at a disadvantage as a female diplomat, in that I was often seated further away than my male counterparts. For example, a male Australian officer was seated next to the host of an important event, while I was seated among lower-level staff despite my equal diplomatic rank. It limited my ability to interact with key players." End quote. Female officers also experience unwanted physical attention and harassment in certain countries where machismo is valued more than sensitivity. This is particularly infuriating where the sources of harassment are local work contacts outside the mission. For example, your counterparts in local government ministries in the countries where you are assigned, or fellow diplomats from partner countries. Yet short of being recalled at great expense in the middle of your assignment, your position demands that you continue working with them week in, week out, without any option for recourse, redress, or resolution. The fact that alcohol is usually served at functions where Canadian diplomats conduct advocacy and networking activities on behalf of the government does not help matters. Ladies and gentlemen, I have attempted to provide a snapshot of challenges faced by members of the Foreign Service, which are unique within the federal public service as they relate to sexual harassment and, more generally, our conditions of work abroad in service of Canada and of Canadians. I would be pleased to answer any questions or help the committee obtain any additional information you may require. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. We'll now start with our first round of questions, beginning with Ms. Troupe. You have 7 minutes.
And thank you, guests, for coming today. Tim, I just need a bit more information as to what your role is. I guess I'm not clear. What is your role? So if someone is sexually harassed, what is the series of steps that occur? Like what do you do? Like how do you help them?
Right. So the union, FEWO, would only get involved if there were if it resulted in legal action, if there was a very significant grievance filed. You're probably aware that now in the federal public service for years now there has been this so-called informal conflict management system, and so many harassment complaints, as I understand, are first attempted to be dealt with through that mechanism before it gets to the point of a formal grievance. Now, FEWO provides a largely supportive role. We ensure that our members, should they decide to pursue legal recourse, have access to legal counsel. But as I said, it's the mechanisms that are in place allow unions to simply have an advisory or supportive capacity. We do not. We are not the ones who lead any action or pursuit of redress.
So you don't negotiate with the employer on behalf of the employees or get involved in that way, or is that?
Not on individual harassment cases,
okay.
But yes, on salaries, on conditions of work, work hours, overtime, all the rest of it, yes, we do negotiate.
So, but when it comes to harassment, really, you don't do any of that. You would provide legal assistance or perhaps advice as to what route they should go?
Correct.
Okay. And Vicki, I guess same question. So what do you do to assist a member of your union if there's a sexual harassment grievance? Like what point are you guys involved?
Well, the CLC doesn't represent individual members, right? We're a federation of unions. So each union, and each local in each union may have a different approach depending on the workplace, the language that has been negotiated, and so on, right? So in some case, and I think though on the whole, the desire is, like any workplace conflict, you try to resolve it first informally. If that's not possible, you go to the formal grievance procedure according to whatever is negotiated in your collective agreement. There may be additional policies at the workplace that need to be followed as well. So the union can have a couple of different roles, right? Sometimes we have member-to-member conflicts, in which case we have to do dual duty of making sure that one member who is the complainant has access to the justice, has, is feeling safe in the workplace, and so on. And the other member has the process ensures that due diligence is being followed, right? So we have a duty of fair representation of all of our members, and we have to, and our commitment is to make sure that the processes are followed accordingly.
So how do you balance the conflicting responsibility? When they're on the equal level?
That's a question that I think you might want to ask witnesses that have a more direct, because I cannot speak for individual unions and how they operate, right?
So the unions all do their own thing?
Everybody, okay. The CLC handles things on a policy level, right? But the way that each union has their own culture, for example, so and their own processes and so on. Now there may be different shop stewards who might work with different members, and so on. It really depends, and it's up to the local leadership to determine what to do in a specific situation.
Okay, so that's interesting. So the CLC develops policy, but not for all the unions. You develop policy for other things, but the unions are able to develop their own policies to what best suits their area.
Well, the labor movement is a democratic movement, right? And so really, it's sort of a bottom-up type of thing. We don't develop policies in isolation. We develop it with our membership, our affiliates. They in turn develop their own policies with their own memberships through democratic processes that exist within the unions. It's a very decentralized structure.
Okay. The retention and disposal standard for documents governed by the Privacy Act and prescribed by the Treasury Board states that matters dealing with complaints of personal harassment where there has not been a secondary incident within the space of 2 years, that all documents relating to the incident, including any letters outlining disciplinary action, is shredded. Essentially, if there's no other complaints against you after 2 years, the documents relating to harassment is shredded and it doesn't follow you from area to area. So if you move from one area to another area, 3 years later, no one knows that you were that you were maybe investigated or charged with sexual harassment. Do you think that 2 years is an appropriate amount of time to keep on file information related to an employee's offense? I'd like to maybe ask both of you your opinion on that. Do you think it should be more? Do you think it should ever be shredded? I could start with you, Vicki, first.
I don't know if I can really answer that. I'd really have to look at the whole policy and see. I think ultimately, resolving sexual harassment as a problem in the workplace is not really about crime and punishment, right? It's about trying to create healthy workplaces where sort of justice is and equality are values, right? And so labeling somebody, a harasser, I don't know if is necessarily going to help to resolve the broader issue, right? So I would say that I can't really comment on the specific policy.
Sure,
but
thank you.
Yeah.
Tim, do you have a comment on that one?
Yeah,
What's your thought on that?
My only comment on this would be that in a rotational workplace like the one that foreign service officers experience, there would probably be merit in extending that period a little bit longer. Institutional memory does tend to die fairly quickly and fairly hard, unfortunately, within our departments, especially for positions that are filled by rotational officers. And so extending that period would, I suppose, enable that record to be on file a little bit longer so that the memory wasn't lost. However, I spoke earlier about corridor reputation, and of course that swings both ways. In my discussions with some of my female colleagues, they confirmed to me that there is always an informal, unwritten list of individuals circulating, and I'm sure it's the same in any workplace, but it's particularly important in the Foreign Service where you're changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, and you may suddenly end up in a position and you were not warned, or you did not have information on the manager or the colleague, the coworker, or subordinate that would have helped you make a more informed decision so you weren't putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation.
I'm afraid I'll have to interrupt now, but thank you very much, Mr. Edwards, and we'll now move on to the other side with Ms. Freeman. You have 7 minutes.
Glad to be here again. So I'm going to start with Vicki. So what amount of resources does CLC dedicate to combating harassment, and particularly sexual harassment in the workplace, and what type of resources do you provide?
Well, a lot of it just really exists on a policy level, and really a lot of this work was done a number of years ago in helping unions create policy. So we have, policies and procedures for our own events around making sure that they're harassment-free events. So there's policies for conventions and for our educational schools and so on, because harassment can occur in any place where people gather and to do work together, right? So we have to do our own sort of protecting of members in-house. We also, assist with creating educational programs and training for union representatives, for example. So training that we create for shop stewards or for women in leadership might also include components around creating a harassment-free workplace, dealing with conflict at the workplace. I can say that, for example, a women in leadership course that I am creating right now, it has a component around dealing with conflict and aggressive behavior at the workplace, so that when you do have to resolve a situation or you find that yourself encountering harassment, that you have the skills to be able to deal with that. So those are the types of resources. So policy development, education, and training are the main things.
Great. So this committee has heard a lot that the culture is key to creating a sexual harassment and harassment-free workplace. Do you agree, and could you elaborate?
Yeah, I certainly do, and I think it's important. I think that the comments that were made by my colleague here about the impact of the cuts on stress and quality of life are something that should be paid close attention to. When the stress in a workplace is heightened, people are more likely to be put at risk, and it may be that harassing behavior comes out of a place of anxiety and insecurity at work. It may be, though, that harassment has been occurring all along, and this extra layer of pressure makes it even more difficult to actually come forward and lay a complaint. But the main thing really is around the behavior of managers in being responsive to addressing problems, resolving conflicts, since so much needs to happen at the informal level before it even gets to the formal processes. If you don't have a manager that you can go to with a problem, you're not going to come forward. If you think that you're going to be labeled, if you're putting yourself at risk for the kinds of things that people are going to say about you, you do a cost-benefit analysis when you're being harassed, and for many women, at least in the short term, it seems easier just to lay low or to leave. Right? And then if you have people leaving all the time because it is an unhealthy workplace culture, well, that's not going to help productivity either. So.
Got any suggestions to address that problem?
Suggestions to address it? Well, I think investing in your public servants, for example, at the federal workplace, I think is one. Good, healthy labor relations is also important. And, I do think that training for managers is really important, but really it's you can go to all the workshops you want. If you don't actually implement the policies or the guidelines, if you don't change your behavior, then it's not going to make a difference, right? So there needs to be some incentives for keeping people happy at work.
Do you think that workplace inequality, as in pay inequality overall, has an effect on?
Yeah, definitely. Any sort of any symptom of inequality between women and men that manifests at the workplace is going to compound the problem of harassment. It's all interrelated. If there's unequal power relations, people it reinforces the kinds of behaviors that we see being acted upon when people harass others. So it certainly leaves women vulnerable, and so pay inequity is a really big one. Mm-hmm.
Going to ask you a bit about ADR, alternative dispute resolution. So many employers encourage employees to go through the ADR process before filing a grievance through a union. In situations of harassment, specifically sexual harassment, does your organization and your affiliates support the ADR process?
I think it really depends on how it's manifested at a particular workplace. So it's hard for me to comment. I think it's something that you need to ask the specific affiliates as they come forward, as your study continues. I think in principle, when you first become a shop steward, you're encouraged to try and resolve problems informally without having to go as far as a grievance, right? But sometimes that's just not possible. If people aren't meaningfully going through alternative dispute resolution, then sometimes you need to have formal processes. And sometimes the situation just, is so extreme that you can't. You just have to take formal steps.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Edwards. How much time do I have? So you represent Foreign Service officers who are stationed, they're stationed at different places at different times. So do the amount of incidents that occur, are they more frequent in Canada or in international? Or do you
I would
have
say
that covered?
internationally.
Internationally.
Far and away, yeah.
Did you have to defend your employees in harassment cases, particularly sexual harassment, in contexts where different cultures are involved? So you were involved in the defense.
Right. I should note at the outset that certainly in recent years, as long as I've been on the executive, which is now 5 years, our union has never had to pursue a sexual harassment, or at least been brought in on a sexual harassment grievance by our members. As for those abroad, as I indicated, usually the assailant is not actually a Government of Canada employee, so one's recourse is limited, and in those cases, no, you do not have any channels through which to pursue.
Right. So it's a question of being in a culture that's not a Canadian
right.
culture. Does the association pay any attention to exposing the problems with that, or?
No.
No.
I'm afraid I'll have to cut you off at this point. We'll now move on to Ms. O'Neill-Gordon. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses, for being with us today. The same with what you were telling us, that more and more we've heard from other departments that the other departments, as well as yourself, are leaning and trying to work more and more to a no tolerance of sexual harassment or any harassment, really. And we see this, and I'm happy to see that you people, too, as well, are working hard for that, to obtain that objective, that goal. Now, I understand that the unions were consulted during the development of the new Treasury Board Secretariat policy on values and ethics. And what was your participation in the development of this policy?
That starts
Yeah.
with me? Yeah. Well, yes, our involvement is generally through the National Joint Council as one of the 18 federal bargaining agents. The area of the Values and Ethics Code that concerned us the most as our association was the post-employment section, given that a lot of our members do end up moving into fairly prominent or high profile or sensitive jobs should they leave the public service. I'm talking about senior positions in the private sector and civil society. So that was really the area we were consulted on, where we involved ourselves. We did not have any complaint with the harassment portions of that code.
Do you have anything to add, Ms. Baldwin?
No, because we don't represent federal workers directly. That would be our affiliates.
And were you satisfied with the result of it, of the final policy?
Yes.
Yes. Do you provide any training to your employees? I know you mentioned that each union is doing their own thing sort of deal, but do you have a general training policy that you provide to everybody? And when is it that they go into this training, and how often? Can you give us a little outlook on what that is done, how that goes?
You know, that each union has their own sort of educational programs, and we don't have at the moment any specific workshops that we provide on sexual harassment prevention. We do a lot of, but it's kind of incorporated into other types of educational programs. So it may be that, and I can't speak for what happened 10 or 15 years ago when we really started to ramp up the work. So I don't have a good answer for that one.
Our office is relatively small. As a union of only 1,400 members, our office staff, we have an office staff of 7. It's not very large. 2 men, 5 women. The head of the association, the head of our office is male. And most have been working for years, if not decades, for the association. So the short answer is no training in place on harassment topics, though in the view of the executive of the association, no need for it. Though coded in our terms and conditions of employment is a very strict no-tolerance harassment policy. So that is there already. Now, if I can speak to the departments where we work, they do have harassment and gender sensitivity training available. It is mandatory. I took it years ago when I first joined the department, and I do have to say that I think it, along with a more general culture change, is having an impact. The fact that I'm here not trumpeting a whole slew of sexual harassment cases that our members have undergone where they have been victimized by fellow Government of Canada employees is probably indicative of a positive trend. But to answer your question specifically, there is training in place within the workplace, within the departments where our members serve.
If I could just elaborate on that, and that it exists like that because preventing a harassment-free workplace or ensuring a harassment-free workplace is the employer's responsibility, right? And so we want to make sure that employers have those trainings in place, have those supports in place. That's our job as unions. And then when we train our members, it's to help them represent members effectively. So that's the distinction, although we also have a lot of other programs around human rights training and anti-discrimination generally. But the specific role of preventing harassment in the workplace is the responsibility is that of the employers.
Yes. So now I understand that managers do take some of these training before they go into the position as a manager. Do you know how much one of those courses would cost and who pays for that? Is there a cost to the training of the manager?
Certainly there is a cost. I mean, no such thing as a free lunch. But because it's provided internally by the departments, the only cost you ever see is if you cancel, in which case then our training department will then dock you, I think, $350 for a half-day course and $700 for a full-day course. That I don't think reflects the actual cost of offering the training. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer on that.
No. Yes,
the departments would, though.
No, because we don't conduct training for managers. Yeah.
The Canadian Industrial Relations Board appeared before us earlier, and in this study, and they mentioned that they are the ones responsible for ensuring that unions fairly represent all the employees. This includes complaints from employees who were identified as a harasser in a sexual harassment grievance, and they got back to us with a statistic since 1999 with 16 employees who were accused of sexual harassment filed complaints with the board alleging that their union had failed to fairly represent them. They also indicated that this number does not include cases where the complaint against the union was successfully mediated by CIRB staff. I'm wondering if you maintain statistics for your organization with relation to the number of respondents who escalate to the CIRB. You have hard stats.
I don't think I have any statistics on duty of fair representation complaints. Perhaps the individual affiliates might, but I mean, if they're kept at the CRIB, it happens very rarely. But in cases where you have a member-to-member conflict, it is that's why we have processes to hold unions accountable for their duty of fair representation.
Madame Smallman. I'll have to cut you off at this point. We'll now move on to Ms. Groh. You have 5 minutes.
The small one, I have to initially acknowledge the work of the Canadian Labour Congress and the work that you do, especially on behalf of women, and in particular the missing and Aboriginal women. And the leadership that you've shown with the Native Women's Association is very much appreciated, I think, by many people. You referenced a survey that was done in 1993. Now, could you just elaborate, was that a general survey of Canadians and so on?
Yeah, it was a Statistics Canada survey, and my understanding that it was a survey with individual women. I think they had aimed to contact a significant number of women, and you'd have to look at the study to see how many they actually did. And it asked them a range of questions around their experience of violence, and some of the questions did have to do with violence and harassment that they encountered at the workplace. So, and I've looked at other statistics in sort of trying to prepare for this. I looked at other violence against women reports from Statistics Canada, and it all has to do with, it doesn't really touch on the issue of workplace harassment unless it's escalated to sort of criminal harassment, and then you get the questions from the surveys on victimization. So this was more of a general, have you experienced harassment or other forms of violence, and it was a fairly comprehensive survey and some really interesting results that would be interesting to replicate now 20 years later.
Well, it would be, but I think Stats Canada is quite limited in its ability
Indeed it
to
is.
do a lot of things. We're going to have to rely on the Labour Congress maybe to do that. Mr. Edwards, it strikes me in your comments that there are huge opportunities for problems. And, when you've got 1/3 responding that, that they have seen, witnessed, or whatever, I don't think we ever hear enough about the foreign service aspect of it and what goes on there. Do you have some examples that you might want to share with us of some of the individual cases that you're aware of, or the kind of complaints that you have? It just strikes me in your comments that there's an awful lot of areas that we might be able to improve on and better protect the foreign service members.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the short answer is no. We don't have a catalog of anecdotal cases. Now, we could mine the data that we collected recently from our survey in greater detail, especially the anecdotal comments on the harassment subject, and get back to you. I think that for better or for worse, and probably for worse, a lot of these incidents abroad go unreported. I think they're seen as an occupational hazard. When you sign up to be a Foreign Service officer, whether you're male or female, you go abroad and you know that you're going to encounter a number of different risks, whether they be health risks, whether they be political violence risks, whether they be personal safety risks, and harassment, sadly, is one of them, especially if you are there, and there is a higher systematic chance of you encountering that if you are posted to certain countries rather than others. Because it's under or unreported, we don't have a compilation of statistics or specific examples. However, we would be pleased to solicit some feedback from our members on this subject should this committee wish to have access to perhaps a greater range of anecdotal cases.
I think it would be very helpful for us, because just my sense in your comments amongst your 1,400 members, and again, we're talking about females primarily, but I mean, the reality is today we're dealing with, could be sexual harassment in a variety of different people in different ways. But I can't help but sense that the vulnerability of people who do take on the job of foreign service workers and have that kind of a rotation and so on that happens. You've indicated that you have to apply for various postings. And I would also imagine that the women in particular look at some of those postings, even though they're very desirable for the experience, but they'd be quite concerned with some of the issues that you reiterated earlier. And they're there and very vulnerable. They're not in a huge organization that has a lot of backup for them. So there must be ways that we can somehow strengthen the Foreign Service to be able to attract the right people into that particular job and give them the protection that they need.
I couldn't agree more. For political reasons, some of our like-minded countries, the Nordics in particular, they make a point of assigning female ambassadors to places like Saudi Arabia, for instance. We don't have a policy like that, but obviously, should a female candidate be determined to be the most meritorious, then yes, they would be assigned as head of mission. Again, the fact that I don't have a long laundry list, that this is not a topic that our members have said needs to be a high priority for the association, is perhaps indicative that at least when you're interacting with Government of Canada employees, that while there are, I'm sure, isolated cases, that on the whole we're doing relatively well within our departments. But I appreciate the sentiment on the environment abroad and the vulnerabilities, and we can certainly go and try to gather some more anecdotal information. I'd be pleased to.
I think that would be helpful. In the kind of recommendations that we might make as a committee that would strengthen those areas, I think, are important. So I appreciate that, Ms. Smallman. The recommendations that we're looking to strengthen our policies as we move forward for a healthy workplace. Big issue is the retribution that happens to the so-called troublemaker who has the courage to lodge a complaint. And empowering those individuals is a real challenge, because it's just, you don't want to. I don't believe people make these complaints lightly against someone.
No, they certainly don't. I mean, when you think about what a woman has to go through to even consider talking to somebody, and many women don't, right? They will just sort of put their head down and work and hope that it changes, try and avoid the situation, or they'll just leave, right? You see a department with a high turnover, you probably should think about that.
Unfortunately, our time is up for Ms. Groh. We'll now start our second round of questions, beginning with Mrs. Embler.
To both of you today for being here. My first question for Mr. Edwards is regarding the survey that you referenced. You mentioned that that there are 1,400 employees in the Foreign Service, and a third of those surveyed indicated they'd experienced some form of harassment, and 45% witnessed some form of harassment. I'm wondering, when the survey was done, how many employees filled out the survey?
Like I said, it was 56% of our total membership, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 750 individuals.
Okay. And when was it taken?
It was done about a month ago.
Oh, really?
We're still sifting through the data. We had to scramble a little bit to assemble some statistics for this presentation.
So very recent.
Yes.
Do you do this annually?
No. We haven't done it in many years, actually. And It's long overdue.
Okay. And so I guess sort of leads to a follow-up. Ms. O'Neill-Gordon was asking about, mentioned the zero tolerance policy that we hear about exists in most organizations, especially federal workplaces. But is it the case that in the Foreign Service you really can't follow a zero tolerance policy because you have to take into account all of the different cultural environments in which your employees serve?
Mm-hmm. I think you can have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to other Government of Canada employees, your coworkers, your supervisors, and so on. And I believe that policy is in place and is followed.
Good.
But you're quite right. As I said earlier, it is sadly an occupational risk of life in the Foreign Service that you will encounter these situations abroad,
right.
Both professionally and personally when you're off the clock.
Right. So, it being an occupational hazard, is there anything that can be done, that we can do as a government, that you can do as an association to mitigate the damage, mental, psychological, or otherwise, to people who work for us abroad?
Yeah, there is an employee support program in place at the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's based in Ottawa, and of course they don't travel to each country where a complaint is lodged or concerns are raised. But they are available to consult by phone, by email. Those are in place. One would expect, too, that our managers in the field, if they're aware of an employee being treated in this fashion by one of their professional contacts outside the mission, that they would take steps to mitigate that discomfort, mitigate that behavior, either by either changing that officer's job package, by intervening with that person's superiors in, say, the local foreign ministry or in the partner embassy. So there are ways of mitigating it, but there's certainly the zero tolerance blanket solution, which does exist and is within the purview of the government when you're in Ottawa, is not available abroad.
Right. That's what I thought. Thank you. And so, because it would be a shame, really, for us to not appoint the best qualified female candidate to a posting in one of the countries that you talked about, simply because you knew the risks were high of that woman being harassed or treated poorly by the locals, whether it's in a country in various, you mentioned Buddhist, Muslim countries, or in other countries where machismo is the issue, and so that's a slightly different problem, but really ends up the same as a result. So, I guess, just I find that a little bit concerns me a bit. You mentioned also structural impediments to making a complaint. So, I guess one example would be living abroad. So just physically difficult to make a complaint other than by, say, email or something like that. But what are some of the other structural impediments, and how do you deal with them?
Well, I think, Vicki spoke to these issues too. The idea that you may not get an assignment, that your career prospects may be harmed if you come forward. Again, corridor reputation is so important, even more important within the Foreign Service than most public service workplaces. Okay. And so I think that provides a disincentive for people to come forward, except in the most extreme cases.
Right. Thank you.
Merci. Donc, on passe.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Ms. Day. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you for coming today. Congratulations on everything you've told us about today. I'll be putting my questions mainly to Mr. Edwards. I see that you're wearing the white ribbon, so it probably stands for you that we should end violence forever. So thank you for wearing that. Mr. Edwards, do you have an idea of the number of women who have resigned and who have asked to, for example, have their location or job changed because of harassment? You don't know how many have asked that? No, we don't keep that kind of statistic. It's our members that have to approach us for us to consider this, and in most cases, our members use those mechanisms that already exist within departments, and so these associations aren't necessarily involved. How well prepared are your staff before they leave the country? Is there any special training? Well, we offer sort of orientation type training that provides them with information about the culture they'll be living within. We hire Canadians from that country who have worked in the country where the posting will take place to help, for example, help them become familiar with local practices. And generally speaking, there's also the training I referred to earlier on harassment and values and ethics. That's not necessarily specific to our posting training. That can be undertaken throughout one's career. And I believe that's offered within the first year, actually. Thank you. Ms. Gordon asked a question earlier about the cost of training. And you managed to answer that, but I would like to know what you think the cost is of someone who is suffering from harassment, for example, in terms of illness and resigning, for example, from one's position, loss of income, versus training. Well, I would hesitate to answer that question because we don't necessarily have specific data. However, I could poll our members about that and come back to you with an estimated cost. I would say that when you're posted, all those costs are much, much higher compared to those costs in Ottawa. Obviously, you're paying for accommodation abroad, and you're also being provided with extra funding to help you with any extra costs abroad and any other risks you may be taking when you're living abroad. So the estimated cost of one foreign officer is about $400,000 a year. So that's not only their salary, but all the associated costs. Now, when you lose your work abroad, obviously that cost also is much higher than it is here. Thank you. You mentioned that when staff suffer from harassment that comes from within their workplace, you don't provide them with a service. However, that must exist. Yes, I did consult with our office, and I was told that, quite frankly, they're not aware of a case where we were involved as an association over the past 3 or 4 years. So that's a good sign, but I could try to get more information and maybe dig deeper and see what has happened over the past decade or 20 years, if you like, to see if I can get more information about that. I imagine you offer support to women who suffer from harassment. Were that to occur? Yes, of course. I have 1 minute left, and I have so many questions to fit in. You referred to a culture that can encourage women to remain silent, and that often women who lay complaints or file grievances can end up becoming sick or just sort of disappear from that workplace. So actually, they're withdrawing themselves rather than choosing to fight against this, aren't they? Yes. Well, you mentioned a third of your staff who have suffered situations. Now, are these cases where you have women in these positions, men in these positions? Well, the question in our survey was rather broad. So we referred to sexual harassment, but also abuse of power. For example, if you shout at your staff, that would be one. If you're shouting at them on a regular basis, that would be an example. So there can be abusive behavior as well. And again, we could dig deeper into that to break that down into the different types of behavior. Are we talking about what percentage is sexual harassment? What percentage is harassment, abusive behavior? I'm afraid I'll have to cut you off. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. That wraps up our first panel of witnesses. I think we probably could have gone on for another few hours together this morning because it has been so interesting. So thank you very much for coming today and for having accepted our invitation to appear before the committee. I believe there were certain requests for information that were made, so the clerk will be in touch with you. Thank you very much. Have a good day. And I'll just suspend for a few minutes to allow our next witnesses to come forward. Thank you.
si vous permettez.
So with your permission, we'll start up again. Good morning again to all of you. And thank you to our witnesses for having accepted our invitation. I believe it was this week actually, last Tuesday. I'm afraid we had to cut off our meeting rather abruptly. That shouldn't happen again today. So now we will focus on the questions that we had because you already made your opening remarks. So we have until 10:30 to do that. We'll begin with the first round of questions with Ms. James. You have 7 minutes.
Welcome back to both of our guests today. In the last visit, you had talked about the different orientation training that you offer, and you had indicated that approximately 4,200 people have attended that orientation training, and 57,000 have attended the Essentials of Authority Delegation training for managers. But the three courses specifically that deal with sexual harassment in the workplace are more geared into that direction, are creating a respectful workplace, investigating harassment complaints, and managing harassment complaints. And I'm just wondering if you could indicate how many individuals so far have attended each of those three courses that are really more geared towards this particular topic in our committee. So the first one was creating a respectful workplace.
Sure, and just a point of clarification, the orientation program, it was 42,000.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yes, I have 42,000. I just misread it. Thank
That's
you.
fine.
I even have my glasses on.
That's fine. As I mentioned last time, and as the opening remarks outlined, the number of learners that go through the school sort of a pyramid effect. The wider, the more foundational the learning part of it is, the more we have users at the school. The more precise we go, the smaller the target audience are for those products. So for creating a respectful workplace, since 2010, over 3,000 employees have taken that course. And then the more specific courses to the labor relations specialists and those that work in the field, that number goes down significantly because it's proportionate to the amount of potential learners that can take the course. And we're dealing with 142 for investigating and 243 for managing harassment complaints.
And is that since 2010 as well?
2010, it is.
Okay. Are any of these courses mandatory, these ones that I'm more interested in? Are they mandatory?
They are not mandatory.
They're not mandatory. So what percentage of people actually take these courses, or do you think should be taking these courses?
Well, the creating a respectful workplace in itself is a very valuable product. But the concepts of creating a respectful workplace are included in many other products that aren't listed here. We did not want to go through the whole school curriculum. In terms of the more precise courses, we don't have readily here the statistics of the whole community, so it's hard to tell the exact proportion that we're hitting. But I would argue that the numbers we have there proportionate to the amount of specialists, labor relations specialists in departments, that these numbers reflect an important segment, but I don't have the exact percentage.
And I think from the last meeting I had information on the costs. And the creating the respectful workplace is $275. Is that correct?
It is.
Investigating harassment complaints, that particular course is $1,375, $1,375.
It is.
Managing harassment complaints are $300. Can you explain why there's such a great variance in the cost associated with each of those
Sure.
courses? I mean, is one a half day versus a 2-day?
Exactly. The duration of the course is the big driver for the total cost. Investigating harassment complaints is a 5-day course, sorry. So essentially when we cost our products, we look at all of the program direct and indirect costs, and we amortize that by the amount of learners we anticipate to have, as well as the length of the course. So it's based on a per day, and then it's essentially prorated to the number of days of the course.
And how long are the other two courses that are only $275 and $300?
They're both 1 day.
1 day? Can I just interrupt for one moment? I'm having troubles with the sound. It's cutting in and out. Is anyone else at the table? And I hope this isn't taken away from my time. Okay.
Ouais, non, c'est ça.
Okay. just it's coming in and out, and I have a bit of trouble hearing. So, secondary to those types of questions, how often are these courses offered? Obviously, the 5-day one, is it offered as frequently as the other ones?
The school's offering strategy depends on demand, so we essentially offer those courses on our website, and as soon as we get a demand that is significant enough and worth an actual offering, then we do those offerings. In these particular cases, they are not offered that often because the school is responsive to the actual demand. For example, we try to have a minimum amount of participants in order to deliver the course. So if we only have 2 or 3 people that are interested in the course, we kind of wait till that number goes up, and then we do an offering to meet the demand.
So how many people would be considered a demand for each of those courses? Obviously, the first one, if there's 3,000 people who have participated in it, it's held obviously more frequently because there's a higher demand. But what would you consider a required number? Because I guess the secondary question is, how often have you offered these in the last couple of years? If there's not a huge demand and there's only 2 or 3 people that are requesting it, I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
What is the demand, and how often have you actually held these sessions?
So for creating a respectful workplace, I do have some statistics here. It's one of our most popular courses, and we had 64 offerings in 2009-10. We had 24 in 2010-11, and we had 16 in 2011-12. For the other courses, as you point out, they are offered less frequently. Sometimes we do them by MOU with departments, and typically we have at least one offering per year in each of the official languages.
And where are those actually? Sorry. And where are those actually held? Is it? Do you have to actually be physically on site, or can you do things online?
These courses are offered at the school's premises in our classrooms.
Do you have any type? We use technology here, so if someone doesn't physically have to be here, we can see and talk to them. Do you use that same technology as well, or does someone physically have to hop on a plane and come all the way to one particular location?
Well, the school has regional offices as well across the country. So we take care of regional needs. We have 10 different points of service, I believe. Is it 13? Yeah, 13 points of service. We are also starting to adopt distance learning technology, but for these specific courses, they are offered in the classroom.
You say 10 different points of service. Are each of those courses held at each of those 10 different points of service, or is there one physical location for the classroom?
Again, if there's enough demand in a particular region, it would be offered in that region. If the demand is not there, then it would be offered. It's offered where the demand is at those 13 points of service.
For the most
Je vais
expensive
devoir
course.
vous arrêter ici, Madame James. Vous avez écoulé votre temps.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I'll have to cut you off. Ms. James will now move on to Ms. Ashton for 7 minutes.
In the recent testimony by Martine Glandon, who's the manager at Value and Ethics at Treasury Board, we learned that it is the responsibility of each ministry to decide whether or not courses on harassment offered by the Canada School of Public Service would be mandatory. Among employees who take these courses, I'm wondering if you know if there are some ministries where there are employees or some ministries that are more involved than others in taking these courses.
The statistics we have are for public service wide, but we know that when we mentioned earlier MOU, these are relationships that we build organization to organization to meet their learning needs. We have a strong relationship with Environment Canada for creating a respectful workplace, but I do not have all of the breakdown for each department.
Is that breakdown available? Could we see that breakdown?
Yeah, the school could provide statistics on that breakdown. I would just caution that the school is one provider that a department can use. So we feel that departments always have a more comprehensive picture of how they choose to meet their learning strategies and who they choose to use as the supplier. For example, there is the Joint Learning Program. I believe it was discussed earlier with the PBS and the Peace Act that offers very relevant training on this subject matter as well. So this school is sort of one piece of the picture, but
Sure. Would you have data? I mean, the data we'd be interested in is around specifically the programming that includes sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment training. So if you could provide us with the breakdown of which departments have access, obviously the training that you offer, and your point is well taken in terms of other training that they may be using, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm also wondering if through your work, or if you're aware of a correlation between departments that take the where their employees take the training, and a lower or higher level of sexual harassment complaints that come out.
You know, from the school's perspective, we focus on offering the best possible and most relevant learning. We don't extend into correlations or analysis in departmental behaviors and the correlations between training and their harassment levels. That would be, the department would be definitely better positioned to do that.
Sure. Unfortunately, that the incidences of sexual harassment are obviously delicate in, well, for many people to come forward with them, and the data is very, is often challenging to come by. But one of the things that we've heard from many witnesses is that in workplaces where there is greater awareness and training, not only might there be a likelihood of there being less harassment, but people also feel more comfortable to come forward. And one of the things that we've noted is that in the area of sexual harassment, it would be important to have maybe even the Department of Status of Women, which is obviously has a vested interest in seeing women in the federal service be better off, I guess, to take that kind of a leadership in coming up with that kind of data, because unfortunately that data, as you pointed out, is and that ability to mark the correlations and take action accordingly is that capacity is just simply not there. Does the Canada School of Public Service have certain mechanisms put in place to measure the effectiveness of your training with respect to harassment?
We have a very rigorous system in place to measure the effectiveness of our products. We have evaluations that are done after each offering to ensure that the objectives were met, that the instructor was effective, that the content was right. Every time a course is delivered, if there's something from that particular course that didn't resonate well with those who took it, we take a corrective action. In addition to that, we review our curriculum annually to look at the high-performing courses, the lower-performing courses in order to adjust, and as well in order to identify gaps in the curriculum where there could be new products. It's a very organic curriculum, although most of the products have been in the curriculum for a long time. There's always a certain percentage that fluctuates pending priorities. And in addition to that, we always work with the Treasury Board Secretariat policy leads and the communities as a whole. The HR community is a very active community, and we're part of that community and consult them regularly to ensure that the suite of offerings that we have meet the needs of essentially the departments and the department heads.
So the Treasury Board came up with a new policy just recently around sexual harassment, and I'm wondering if you were involved in shaping that policy.
From a learning perspective, every time there's a new policy, we're involved, but we're involved especially to be aware of it so that we ensure that our instructors are aware of it and that our materials are up to date as soon as the policy is put in place. We don't set policy, that's the Treasury Board, but we are part of the process. And an early awareness of policy changes is key for the school in order to prepare to deliver the best possible training in a timely way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, you're obviously party to a great deal of feedback based on the training that you have. I mean, one would think that feedback would be useful in shaping effective policy. Do you share the feedback that you get from employees that you train with Treasury Board, or did you in the case of shaping this policy? The
feedback we get and the evaluations we get definitely definitely are part of the school's interventions in these conversations. For example, if we feel that a particular course is not resonating well, the community will know of this particular issue and will try to make sure that the future offerings meet those needs.
And so you don't have that conversation with Treasury in terms of maybe an area that, not just in terms of the effectiveness of the course, obviously that's your prerogative, but in terms of maybe if you see an emerging concern around harassment, for example, does that information get back to Treasury? Does the school?
It does in an informal way because we have discussions with them regularly. It's not an isolated one-year conversation, so we're active in the community, in the HR community. But like I said, our feedback would be one of many feedbacks from departments, the community, and the labor relations specialists within departments.
Je vais devoir vous arrêter ici, malheureusement. Merci.
I'm afraid I'll have to stop you here, and we'll continue our questioning with Ms. Bateman. You have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming today once again. Your work is very, very important for the public service and for the purposes of this study as well.
Oh, because this is what you're doing is huge. It's so important. And as a former manager in the public service of Canada myself, I understood the importance that, I mean, it was my job to make sure and ensure that I had a respectful workplace, that I contributed to that, both up and down. Yeah. And I think that's, we've heard that numerous times, but clearly, I'm also a chartered accountant, and I'm looking at your market, and you've got about ballpark 250,000 public servants.
Yes.
And you've got a culture at the top that says we value a respectful workplace. And you're certainly contributing to that. And yet you're saying that you had 3,000 people, and correct me if I'm wrong, 3,000 public servants have attended the Creating a Respectful Workplace. That's your highest participation harassment course, or anti-harassment.
Yeah, for promoting a respectful workplace, and in the more general products that we have for managers, that is our most popular product.
Okay, so 3,000.
Yes.
And 142 were, the specialists are the ones who investigate,
yes.
So that's understandably somewhat lower, but and 243 for the managing harassment complaints. If I was managing your, and I'm curious. Like if I was sitting in your spot, I'd sit back and say, okay, here's my potential market, 250,000. Here's my achieved market, 300,000. How do I grow my market? Because you can only offer this if you offer it on a cost-effective basis, if you're giving the managers what they need, if you're giving the employees what they need. So I'm really curious how you do that.
Well, I mean, I would add to the fact that these courses here are the courses that are the most precisely linked to this study. Most of our leadership and professional development courses include values and ethics and values-based leadership and creating a respectful workplace. So we feel as a school that this number is not as high as it could be, but that the notion of a respectful workplace and values-based leadership is a key driver in the way we develop, most of all of our other offerings as well.
And do you use the findings in the public service? Do you regularly refresh the documentation that you're providing, the experts that you use to hone the courses?
Yes, we do.
So you're constantly refreshing.
Every year we go through an exercise where we look at the curriculum and have an evergreening process to ensure that it's up to date and that it meets the needs now.
So I'm a manager in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I've worked with some colleagues, and we can get 24 people in the classroom. And what's your how do you figure out? I mean, obviously the cost of developing the module is a sunk cost, but you're going to spread that over your total recapture. How do you develop your cost?
So well, in this particular case, the cost is already set because we have an idea on how many people we expect to have take a course, and we amortize that. In this particular case, the regional point of service would meet with the manager in Winnipeg and organize a particular offering for this product in location in Winnipeg.
Okay. You clearly have competition in this business, because I know as a public servant, clearly you're not capturing the market. We're hearing from Treasury Board that there's an expectation that everybody get some training as soon as they're hired. We've got 250,000 ballpark people. You've got 3,000 having taken your course. And as a public servant myself, I worked in a department where every year we had a session on creating a respectful workplace. It wasn't optional. It was every year, and the whole department had to be in there. And if you were away on business, you had to figure out another time. It wasn't the public service, the school, I don't believe, who provided that training. And it was pretty cost effective, I think, because they came right to the department. It was a relatively small department. But, I mean, how are you dealing with the competition? Because everybody has to deal with the competition.
And that is a very accurate statement, and this particular curriculum is one facet of it. In other particular areas, the school is used more predominantly. As mentioned earlier, some departments can choose to develop in-house methodologies to do culture change and behavior change within the organization, and or use the school. And we do have the flexibility of offering tailored learning to a particular department and come into a department and offer those services as well. Often when we do that, it's less on one particular theme or one particular product, but it's more an organization that identifies various different themes, and we package a slate of courses that we can come in and tailor to the department's needs.
Okay. Now, we just had two individuals present, and they were representing more of a union framework. And the lady representing the Canada Labour Congress indicated that they do not train managers. Now, obviously, all managers still pay union dues. So how do we, as a public service, support those managers with the right tools? Because their union that they're paying the dues to clearly, I mean, the lady said they do not train them. The moment a person becomes a manager, how do you work with public service management or directors to ensure that those managers have the tools they need to ensure there is a respectful workplace?
Well, and from that perspective, we get back to the foundational learning and the authority delegation training. So departments have the role to identify those people.
So there's nothing incremental other than the authority delegation training?
It starts there, and it has a pretty important people management component.
So about a day?
Yes, people management and code of values and ethics would amount to about a day.
Okay, so you target it. So I would suggest that your statistics probably, well, you had said before there were 57.
Madame Bateman, je vais devoir vous arrêter ici.
Mrs. Bateman, I'm afraid I have to cut you off at this point. This has been very interesting. Thank you. I know time goes by quickly. Ms. Groh, you now have the floor for 7 minutes.
You offer your offerings to other than the public service?
We include some provincial public servants into regional offerings, and this enables us to meet the required targets so that we try to reach as many public servants as possible. But generally speaking, the focus of the school is the public service.
Okay. But so you don't go out there and enter into the private marketplace. You stay pretty much provincial and federal is your focus.
Yes, well, mostly federal. I was using the provincial example as some areas where people outside the federal public service take our courses.
Okay. What would the overall budget be of your school? I can ask that question.
The school's overall budget is roughly, and I don't have my CFO with me, but it's roughly $100 million. Of which 55% of that is based on revenue.
55% is so you get that much back on covering the program.
Exactly.
And the other 45%?
It's centrally funded A-base, especially it's money to do the orientation program, the foundational learning, the authority delegation training, as well as other topics. But I don't have the total. That total breakdown, but those are the rough numbers.
Has there been any more of an increase in requests for courses, i.e. the harassment side, specifically the issues of sexual harassment in the workplace? Has there been any interest placed in the last couple of months? Gathering the fact that we were doing this study, has there been a renewed interest from any of our departments, Better Lee?
We have had, some conversation. It is definitely creating an impact. Can't measure that impact yet because we haven't seen the fluctuation in the statistics or the number of offerings we need to create. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'd say about 65% of our business volume, we're a school and we sort of operate like a school, and it's always between September and October. So we have a lot of fluctuations right now happening because that's when most of the training at the school is delivered. So to try to pinpoint a particular impact would be difficult to do at this time.
If a manager is found to be harassing an employee, and part of that retribution is that they have to go to a 3 or 4 day program specific to these issues of sexual harassment, how long generally would that have to take before the individual, the manager or supervisor or whoever, would be able to get into a program? Would they have to wait a year, 6 months, 3 months, or is there a fairly quick turnaround?
Our calendar offerings are open enrollment, which means if a particular manager has been identified by a department to take a particular course, then they would register to the next available offering. And these offerings, as I mentioned earlier, are based on demand, but in particular, creating a respectful workplace, for example, the bulk of the offerings are given between September and April, just because of the learning patterns in government.
And how many people, by and large, do you need in order to be able to put a course on?
Generally speaking, as a golden rule, it's around 15 learners, 15 to 20 learners. These numbers differ when we have an organization-to-organization conversation because often it's packaged in a way that we have more flexibility because it's an organizationally led demand.
We design our courses typically for up to 24 participants, and then we calculate that we'll go ahead and offer it when we have around 2/3 full. But as my colleague said, when we're working directly with departments, there is some more flexibility.
And again, you've been able to offer the offerings to 3,000 people out of the 250,000 that work for the public service. So it's not everybody and not every department that's necessarily taking advantage of the opportunity to attend the school and take various programs.
Well, I mean, I can't comment on the department's decision. Our job is to make sure that the offering's in the window and that it's available for them to take. That's sort of our role as a school, to make sure that it's there and it's there for the taking. But we can't enforce the demand or a department to absolutely use this course. It's up to them to decide.
How many other schools, let's say in the Ottawa area, are there that are offering similar kind of programs that you're offering?
In terms of schools per se, I would say that I don't know of any private schools, but there are many private suppliers that can tailor their learning skills and package information for departments. We don't track when departments hire a particular private sector company to deliver their learning, so it's impossible for me to pinpoint exactly how many schools or institutions there are. But the private sector does and can adapt their learning strategies to do this.
And how much of the work that you do in your offerings refers to the culture or attitude of the respectful workplace?
An exact percentage I wouldn't have, but I would say that the ballpark, most of our leadership and professional development courses have, the craft of government core to its mandate. And within that includes creating a respectful workplace as well as promoting the code of values and ethics.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Vous reste 30 seconds?
No, we're good.
Okay.
I'm fine, thank you.
Donc, on va maintenant passer.
We'll now move to the other side. Second round of questions. Ms. Young. You have 5 minutes.
So she'll go first. Thank you.
Thank you. I was listening, and I'm not sure whether I heard this correctly. Did you say that your school or your organization operates somewhat like a regular school, whereby you don't offer courses or whatever during the summer? Did I hear something to that effect?
No,
I just wanted to clarify that.
The offerings are there year-round.
What exactly did you say? Because I caught it.
The pattern is that the bulk of the volume of those who come to the school is between late August and end of fiscal year, but the school operates 12 months and does have offerings year-round.
Why is it that the courses? Why does it tend to be late August to the end of the fiscal year? I just out of curious, and then I'll pass the remaining time back to my colleague.
Well, we don't control the patterns and the department's spending, but often it's more or less follows the flow of having the learning plans in place in departments and having their budgets allocated for them to determine how they want to deal with their learning strategies, and then the summer months are affected, I guess, by their vacations or whatnot. But the patterns in the past has been that the bulk of the volume is during that period.
And do you feel, to my colleague who's passed some time, do you feel that there'd be any cost savings if it offered courses only part of the year? Because it seems to be more bulked into one particular part of the fiscal period or period ending, do you feel that there'd be some cost savings if the school operated at perhaps a certain, like a time frame within that particular period and perhaps didn't operate for the rest? I'm just trying to, because it doesn't seem like there's things are being offered on demand and so forth.
Yeah,
so I'm just wondering whether there's some cost savings to be had here.
Yeah, and there is demand during the summer, and the way we operate is that most of the instructors are pay-per-use, so that we don't have the full capacity of the school year-round. We actually get more instructors and more resources available at the school during the busy time, so we adapt to that.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll just pass the remaining time back to my colleague. Thank you, Wei.
Just checking, since we have votes, how much time do we have left, Madam Chair?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
On n'a pas de vote actuellement.
There aren't any votes.
I'm very curious because we've had many different witnesses in front of us for the study. And some of them are smaller departments, as you know, and some of them are larger departments. There seems to be sort of a sense from some of the smaller departments, people representing them, that they're a little all alone and they only have these very small, like 1-person or 7-person units looking after sexual harassment, etc. And a little bit of an unawareness of the courses or the training or the supports, I guess, that the federal government has for them as a department. Can you tell me about your marketing or your outreach strategies and how you market yourself to other departments, particularly the smaller ones, that you are there to support them?
Yes, well, the school is definitely there to support departments, small or big. Our marketing approaches are often tailored to the needs that we hear from the community. I don't think that we marginalize the smaller departments. They're definitely welcome to use the school, and the marketing approach, it does not differentiate its efforts based on size, although there are bigger departments that have a mass of employees, and naturally we don't measure if it's a byproduct of marketing or not. Marginally, the bigger departments are bigger users of the school just because of the numbers.
I mean, obviously that makes common sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is if we were to do an analysis, for example, on where sexual harassment complaints are and compare that to the size of the department and the various courses that they have or have not requested their people to attend or did not, might we find that there's a correlation between whether, attendance is encouraged and or even mandatory for those smaller departments and or incidents of harassment complaints?
Well, I mean, I can't talk to what a department and the analysis and the result from the school perspective. Our job would be to make sure to be there to complement and to respond to the demand following an analysis of a department. And if a particular department felt that there was a particular need within the department, we would then sit with them and see organizationally to organizationally how the school could best support their learning needs.
Would it therefore be possible for us to get some information?
Je vais devoir vous arrêter ici, Madame Young.
I'm afraid I'll have to cut you off at this point. Your time is up. And we'll now move to Ms. Ashton. 5 minutes.
Partager la parole avec ma collègue.
Thank you very much. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague.
Could learn something from the school from your school and the work you do when it comes to training around sexual harassment.
I don't, from the school's perspective, we don't analyze the curricular strategies from the private sector. I think that what we have at the school is a very internal knowledge of the craft of government and how that works, and a very sound understanding of the communities. And our instructors being, in most cases, when you get into very subject matter specialized courses, are trained current public servants.
Mm-hmm. The reason why I also ask that is because it's known that women are far more equitably represented in positions of power and decision making in the public service compared to the private sector, and obviously that connects very strongly with culture, a culture that whether it condones or certainly supports, I guess, incidents of harassment and sexual harassment in particular. And it would seem to me that the training that you offered, which is catered and based on a system that perhaps is more equitable and better for women to work in, it might be something that the private sector could learn from. And I also want to just to put on the record as well my concern. I know last week it became an issue not to put words in the mouth of other witnesses. And my colleague, Ms. Bateman, made reference to a comment around managers and unions not getting training. And I would caution around judgments being made about managers. Obviously, there's different levels of managerial positions, and I think misinterpreting words that may or may not have been said with regards to training and making general statements with regard to training that may or may not take place is problematic, and I'm not sure what it has to do with actually coming up with proper recommendations in this study.
Madame Bateman, vous avez un point d'ordre?
I have a point of order, Ms. Bateman.
Ashton's comment, could we ask the analyst to specifically extract the comments made by the lady who was here from the Canadian Congress of Labor and analyze the point that I made reference to, because she in her remarks said very clearly that managers, they do not offer managers training. So I was just seeking to find a point so that those managers could be trained, because if we don't train our managers, we've got a problem, and we're all here to work together and make sure we create a respectful workplace. So that, can we make sure that the analyst pulls that and that we as a committee get to look at that specific comment? Because this was not ill-intended. This was intended to make sure that we work together. We have a school of public service that could fill that need. So I just want to clarify that.
Je pense pas qu'on va pouvoir sortir ça.
I don't think we can do that today because the testimony only occurred an hour ago. So I don't think we can do that right now. I don't think we can do what you're asking right now. But absolutely, we can obtain that. No, I'm asking that our analysts give all committee members an analysis of this. With respect to Ms. Ashton's comments, you see, I quoted Ms. Vicky Smallman, the National Director of Women's and Human Rights Department in the Canadian Labour Congress. So I was quoting her. So I quoted her comments in my question to our two witnesses here right now. Perhaps this would be an opportunity then for our witnesses here to to actually provide good service to this public servants market. That was what I was trying to do. I wasn't ill intention in this. So why is this a point of order exactly? Well, it might be a very important point for our committee to consider. Ms. Ashton. I would just like to respond.
Having the right facts, and we're asking all of our witnesses to provide background facts. Maybe it would be interesting, and this has nothing to do with the Canadian Labour Congress and anybody else, but to find out what level of managers receive the kind of training that school offers, and or other kinds of training. Maybe higher up, the higher up you go, they receive training from outside actors. I do think that the statement that was made earlier really doesn't actually add to the kind of recommendations we should be making. But I agree with Ms. Bateman that we need the right kind of information, and I think the right kind of information the analysts could provide based on doing broader research with regard to training and managers in the public service.
Madame Scrow, vous aviez levé la main?
Ms. Scrow, did you have a comment?
Sure where it's all going, but now you've raised an issue that, and I don't want to give work to the analysts when we still have our previous witness here, but my understanding from Canadian Labour Congress, when it came to managers, they do policy and so on. They themselves don't offer training, but within the individual unions, that's where the training of their managers and so on and so forth happens. It does not happen through the Canadian Labour Congress itself because they are a policy development organization. So I don't think we need the analyst to go and spend 15 hours trying to clarify when we still have a witness here who could probably clarify what she meant when she made that comment. But it is 10:30.
Écoutez, par ce débat que je sais pas trop.
Well, I'm not too sure where this discussion is going. We've lost the last few minutes that we did have with the Canada School of Public Service. We have future business to consider. I'm not too sure what you want exactly, Ms. Bateman. I'm sorry. Well, it's just for the good of their committee's work that I'm saying what I'm saying. And so you would like an analysis? Well, I would just like to know exactly what it was that our witness from the Canadian Labour Congress said. Well, yes, obviously we can get that. Yes, I would like us to get what she said because I believe Ms. Ashton misunderstood my comment. Well, that's fine, Ms. Bateman. Perhaps the next time you'd like to have that in writing, don't make it as a point of order. And perhaps you could actually ask for that after the committee's deliberations, not during questioning by other members. I think that would be appreciated because now, unfortunately, Ms. Ashton has lost the time that she had left to ask her questions. So perhaps the next time you could keep that in mind. Thank you very much, Ms. Bateman. So on that, I apologize, but our meeting is over in terms of the second panel. I'd like to thank you very much for having come before us again. It was all very interesting. And we'll now suspend for a few minutes, 1 minute, so that we can move in camera. Thank you.